Welcome to Common Table.
Thank you.
Glad you guys are here. We're going to do introductions in just a second. If you watched the last series, you kind of know what this is about. If you didn't, that's okay too, because this is a totally new series called Broken. And so we're going to talk about things that are broken and how God fixes them, transforms them, restores them, kind of thing. Mostly about us being broken and God restoring us over the next 3 weeks. And so this will be fun. So let's do this. We've got some new members of our crew. I almost said cast again. You know.
New friends.
New friends, new acquaintances, new participants. There's a good word. And so I'll start, because that leader is always good if he does the initial dive in. I'm Charlie. I'm the associate pastor at First United Methodist Church of Starkville, which means I get to preach at Connection every Sunday and sometimes at Big Church and do other things, other duties as assigned, as the resume, as the job descriptions always say. My wife Charlotte and my 5-year-old son named Matthew. That's just a couple of factoids about me, but I love doing Bible study. I love doing pastoral stuff. So we'll go this way to spare the newbies until they've gone. But yeah, just to name a couple things about you, that's sufficient for tonight.
Yeah, my name is Parker Lee. I work here in the media ministry. So I work a lot on Sundays. You see me running around through all the services. So I get to work a lot, but it's fun because it's in a church. So I get to praise God in that way. I got married in March, right before all this hit. Like, I got married Monday, and on Wednesday, President Trump made the Oval Office address, and the world shut down.
Oh, God.
So
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. People keep asking me, like, how marriage is, and I'm like, I don't know. I know how COVID is, because that's all I've known.
Yeah.
But, so yeah, that's me, newly married, 23, just out of college. So.
Cool. I'm Elizabeth Williams. I'm from Starkville. I've been going to First United Methodist for I don't know how long, but quite a while. We were at the contemporary service in the gym when I first started, so I've been here since we have this sanctuary. I work at Emerson Family Resource Center and do a whole bunch of different things there. And I used to work for Connection, and I miss working for Connection. But anyway, I've got 2 young daughters. I have a husband, and my daughters are 15 and 9. So that's pretty much me.
I'm Lisa Ashmore. I actually grew up in the church. My children grew up in the church also. I'm retired and loving it. I've come to Connection. I really enjoy Connection. I enjoy the people here, and I do the Pro Presenter, which is the words and the media on the screen. So, and I started in the gym also, but I started on the TV camera, and then I moved to the media part. So.
All right.
Well, I'm Matthew Reynolds. I'm also another oldie to Connection, but newbie to the cast friend circle. So
That's our new subgroup.
Right.
I like it.
So I've been just kind of helping out with leading worship with Connection for I don't know how many years, probably since I was in middle school or something. Yeah. I help out with children's ministry, doing children's music and leading the little kids around, herding cats. And yeah, I'm in my undergrad, finishing up for music, so.
Nice. What's your favorite instrument?
To play or listen to?
Play.
To play, guitar. Yeah,
Okay.
probably guitar.
And listen to? There's a difference?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
All right.
Violin to listen to.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Sweet.
All right. See, I do ask just whatever questions. All right, so icebreaker question to kind of ease us in. What did you want to be when you grew up? So go back to elementary school. What was when a grown-up would ask you, what are you going to be when you grow up? What was your answer?
Mine was doctor until Kevin Ware, the Louisville basketball player, broke his leg on TV. I saw that and I was like, no, I don't. So now I am here.
Doctor to media. Okay.
Pay scale.
Yeah, right. And whoever wants to go can go, but yeah.
Mine was what I ended out being for a good many years was special ed teacher. I wanted to be a special ed teacher since I was really little, and they first explained to me what that teacher was. And anyway, I did a lot of things like growing up to volunteer in different classrooms and stuff. So like that's what I did that for about 15 years. And so I was kind of lucky I did what I wanted to do. And the second best was a nurse because I watched the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And I wanted to be a nurse like, not quite like them.
Like a psychiatric nurse?
Not quite, but no, I wanted to work in a psychiatric ward. I seriously
Okay.
did, like for some reason, so it was like special ed, psychiatric ward, nurse. I don't really know why.
Okay.
But those were my two things, but one of them I became.
Wow.
I wanted to be a marine biologist.
Okay.
I don't know what happened to that.
Somewhere along the way, I ended up
I
retired.
went away, and then I thought I would be a nurse, but then I'd have to deal with needles, and I didn't really like that. So I guess basically, most of my life I've been a caregiver. Not what I had planned, but
Yeah.
We'll get around some of that in a minute, I think, maybe. Early on for me, it was pro football player. Yeah, I know. Look at me. 5'10", 135 pounds when I graduated high
5'10".
school. Probably, 5'10", with thick shoes on. Probably not going to play pro football. Primarily defensive back. Like Everson Walls was kind of my guy from the Dallas Cowboys or something. But that clearly was not in the cards somewhere along the way. Profession-wise, it was still probably doctor too, until I figured out how long you had to go to school.
That's true.
Be a doctor.
That's true. I would still be in school. You're right.
Yeah, I was like, wait, and then how many more? Yeah, no, because I really was interested in psychiatry, and because I wanted to be like a therapist, and then I figured out you don't have to go to school for 10 more years to be a therapist. It's really just 2 for a master's degree, and so I took instead of medical route to the counseling route, a lot shorter. But early on, I just wanted to like either catch or play defensive back for some NFL team. I don't know what I was thinking. Anyway.
Nice. So I have this distinct memory at the, preschool daycare up the hill where they asked us, this question of what we wanted to be when we grew up. And this was before I had really discovered music, played music, anything like that. And I said construction worker. That was my thing. I just wanted to, wear the hard hat and work a dump truck. That was it. Yeah.
Little kids always like the truck thing. They're always drawn
Yeah.
to the big monster truck thing somehow, of some kind. Absolutely. Okay, what is something you are most hopeful for right now? So we talked about childhood hopes. What is something you are most hopeful for right now?
I just wish everybody could get along.
Okay.
All the looting and the rioting concerns me. Luckily, it's not around here, but I feel like all we can do is just pray and hope it gets better, and I think it will. I think it will in the long run, but that is a concern I have.
Sure. Most hopeful for right now.
I guess it would be, I guess far out wish would be for it to go back to March 10th.
Yeah.
And stay like that?
Yeah. I can't say like before March 10th because then my wife would be angry at me. But I got married March 9th, so March 10th was a really good day.
Wedding day before shutdown.
Yeah. So March 10th was a really good day. March 11th, everything went downhill. But just that free-spirited, we all got to hang out and,
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't have to be 6 feet away. We can pack out this place to be 200 chairs. But
It really does kind of feel like forever ago when you
Yeah.
think back at working at 929, just thinking back at when we used to host concerts in the basement, things like that. We have gotten super nostalgic about things like that. I guess a hope for me, and it's so hard to phrase because there's so much going on, kind of going off of what Lisa was saying, there's so many different sides and everything is so polarized, and I just want everything to calm down. So
It's funny you said polarized, because that was the first thing in my head, but I was like, how do I say I don't know. It's just funny you said that word. I was like, how was it?
He stole your word.
Right? Yeah, he stole my word. It's like Charlie did that one time. No, but seriously, I thought about that. And so then my second thing, as I was sitting here thinking, was empathy. I wish people had more empathy for each other. I think that would help a lot in the rioting and why people are rioting, and just the feeling of polarization, as far as COVID is concerned, and what sides you're on with that. If people would just have a little bit more empathy for each other, I think I would hope for that.
My answer feels incredibly selfish right now, because you all have all these grand things. I would just like to be able to sing and worship and be that. I'd be like, if that could happen. I need a complete restoration would be fantastic, but as we're moving through this, I could say I guess I could add college football to this mix, that it actually happens and executes, but I'm just really hopeful for even pieces of March 10th, if you will. Can we just add this back? Or just add this back? It would give me almost a new breath of air to keep moving, because I think you all experienced it when the shutdown initially happened. It's wait, we can't do what? Mm-hmm. And as it does feel like a year and a half ago when there was no toilet paper, you know what I mean? It's toilet paper, what does that got to do with anything? But it's been going, and then you kind of get into this this is just never going to end type of grief moment where you're okay, this is how things are. This is lame. I want to add certain things, but there's a few things that if I could just add those back, it would restore a sense of okay, I can get through whatever else these other restrictions are. Yeah. And this probably speaks to my worship language a little bit, but the ability to just be able to, even though I can't sing where you'd want to listen, the ability to actually sing in a worship service would buoy my heart to deal with this, if that makes any sense. I could deal with the rest of it if I could do that.
I look most forward to coffee time again.
Yeah.
I think that's a really special time here
Yeah.
at Connection.
I miss cooking.
Yeah, I miss you cooking.
And if in a perfect world, common table would be around a meal.
That's right. I started to bring something. And
Lisa, you bring your sausage balls anytime.
okay.
They are to die for. Your lemon cake, anything.
Because to me that just shows compassion and love, and it's something I enjoy, and I really miss doing that,
Yeah, I think one of the things in dealing with all this stuff is we can't pour ourselves into things. Mm-hmm. The way I asked the question, what are you hopeful for right now? Most of us don't have much planned beyond 2 weeks from now, because every time you do set something 4 or 5 weeks out, the sand sort of shifts under your feet by the time you get close to it. Yep. And so it's created this permanent, there was a running joke, the worst investment ever was a 2020 calendar. If you go buy, those appointment calendars for 2020, and we're going to do this, and we're going to go on vacation here, all of that's been scratched, Yep. And even as you start to kind of go, okay, well, now we can do this in October, and you kind of go, maybe. You say it with everything you plan. It's as long as we can, yep. As long as we're able to. Mm-hmm. Hey, there's going to be college football September 26th, we think.
Yeah.
Everything has a caveat to it,
yep.
And that leaves me going, I want some firm ground to stand on and run. Mm-hmm. Being coming in as a new appointment in July, it's I have all these ideas, and all my ideas were I can't. Mm-hmm. I can't do that either. That's how do you do that? That's how it feels in my office almost every day. It's oh, we could, no, we can't. I just would like to know this is the boundaries, and so I can play within those boundaries. It would fill me with hope. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I think promises have that effect on us. So I'm going to flip the script on the promise front a little bit. Describe a time when someone broke their promise to you, and what was that like? So we've been talking about what promises or hopes feel like, how they propel us forward. Describe a time when somebody broke a promise, and what that felt like.
This is close enough to that I feel like I could answer it. I don't even know what it was over, but I broke a pinky promise to Elle. And Elle fell apart.
Yeah.
And was like, Mom, you broke a pinky promise, and people don't even make pinky promises. Like, they're huge.
And there's promises, and then there's pinky promises.
And she was just holding her little pinky out, And again, I feel bad. I don't, there's no telling what it was. I don't know. But like, she was absolutely crushed. I mean, and crushed because it was a big promise. Whatever it was that I had, I don't know. You can eat dessert first. I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well,
but it was something
with
that was.
kids, if you make a promise, they've booked it. I mean, it's like, I got
They don't
that.
forget.
You better follow through, buddy.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I remember thinking, like, she was like crying. She was really upset. And what she was upset about, again, like I said, I can't even remember what it was about, but I don't think it was even so upset she wasn't getting to do what I'd promised her. It's that I broke a promise. Mm-hmm. Something as sacred as a pinky promise. Mm-hmm. Mom reneged on, and broke. And so I don't know that quite answers because it's not from a personal side.
It's not you getting a broken promise, but you broke one to somebody else. I'll accept those answers. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how did that
feel when you saw her fall apart?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
I just saw the depth of it and the depth of like that pain and that, what's the other word? Distrust. Suddenly there was this like distrust with me because I broke a promise. And I felt tremendously guilty, just because of her.
You can see her get crushed.
Because I could see how crushed she was. I felt, pretty bad about that. I mean, so much so that I guess I remembered it when you mentioned promises.
Yep. Time when somebody broke a promise. And how did it feel? Or apparently you broke a promise to somebody else. we can go that direction. I almost wrote the question that way too. That's okay.
I'm sure that times that people have broken promises to me, I'm sure I felt just like Elle. I can't really think of something, completely like the story, but like I'm sure that we all feel like Elle does, or did. Mm-hmm. Just kind of crushed and distrust suddenly, and
Very true. Anybody got one?
This is hard. It's kind of, nobody really is like, oh, I promise that I'm going to do this. It's not really a thing, but.
Well, can you easily think of one you broke?
Mm-hmm.
Or did you admit on camera that you broke? Let's put it that way. Because I'll be honest, as I was thinking through my answer, my first thing gravitated to my making deals with Matthew, mm-hmm. my little 5-year-old, because he negotiates all the time. Mm-hmm. Okay, Dad, here's the deal. Mm-hmm. Which what he means is, you do this for me, I'll do this for you. He's negotiating at 5. And if I make a promise and I don't keep it, he has a track record. He's like, remember when you promised this? Remember when you promised that thing and we didn't do that or whatever? You promised. I mean, he asked me all the time in the car, will you get me this for Christmas? I'm like, Christmas is 3 months away. Sure. But if I come up on Christmas without the things, he's probably got the list, which is now like, this long. I'll be in trouble in December probably because I won't remember half the promises I made about Christmas gifts. Mm-hmm. And I will break them because I just don't remember what I promised. But when it comes to, I think it's easier for us to call to mind when we failed somebody else. Mm-hmm. That's my theory as we're talking about this, than it is for us to remember when somebody else failed us. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But my personal answer would be more along the lines of, having been in ministry for 20 years, when you call on somebody to be a part of something you're putting together or to come through in a certain way and they don't. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So like, you still have to fundraise for a living. So it's like, hey, can you participate in this fundraiser? Yeah, I will. And then no. You know what I mean? Like those types of, not really, I guess they're making a promise and then they're breaking it, and it's not a deeply emotional, personal promise. Mm-hmm. except that what it does inside of me is it affects trust. Hey, I can rely on them until I can't, kind of thing, and then I kind of pull back from that. And that does take the wind out of my sails. When you're talking about like a project and you're trying to hit a goal, you're trying to move something forward, and they won't carry their piece of the puzzle, it makes you go, I just don't feel like doing this today. Like it de-energizes me if they're not in with me, kind of feel. Does that make sense?
I feel like I was just trying to think, like, what's the antecedent to saying I promise? Because you said, like, that's something like we don't say a lot, like, I promise. And for me, I don't know that it's always in a positive, like, oh, I promise I'll do this. It's more like, I promise I won't do
Still a promise.
this again. You know what I mean? Or, or I'm really sorry, I promise I won't disappoint you anymore. Or, you know, maybe I don't know, spent way too much money, and I'm like, oh, promise. Next time I go to Target, I promise I won't come home with $500 worth of shoes. You know, but like I don't know. Just when you said that, I was sitting here thinking, I was like, when is the last time I have told somebody I promise you? And it's been a little bit more in a negative way. I mean, I don't know if negative is the right word for that,
promising
but
not to do something versus promising to do something.
And it's almost like making like a commitment, like, I will do the dishes more often. Like, you don't have to do them, I will do them. And then just being held accountable to, I cooked tonight, did you do the dishes? No, I'll go do the dishes.
I broke that
Just
promise.
being held accountable to that, but yeah, I mean, just being held to commitments like that, what you're talking about.
And in more of a group setting, you mentioned fundraising.
Yeah.
This definitely wasn't fundraising, but something that it reminded me of was, you know, back before COVID, I used to perform with other people, just do different music gigs, and obviously it's the musician's job to get the word out and make sure all their friends come. And, you know, if you have, you know, 20, 30 people, group of friends that you're like, hey, you should definitely come to this. You tell them early enough in advance, and then like 2 show up, and you're playing to an empty room. It's definitely a bummer.
That has the same feel of what I was talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. You didn't deliver the way you said you would, kind of
Right.
feel. And you just go, first week of connection, we're full. And then service morning, we're half full because they made a commitment to show and didn't. And that first morning is my first connection service, and I'm going, all right. And my wind was pulled a little bit because the room, I'm looking around and going, where's the people that said they'd be here?
Because we were full on like Tuesday.
Yeah, it was full ahead of time.
We were excited the whole week. Like,
And it was just like, oh, the morning of, it was like I had to kind of amp myself back up before going up on the stage. Because like, this was going to be a full house.
Before COVID, we averaged 100 every
Oh, I
Sunday
know.
or more. You know, I think,
And that I'm not so much worried about. It was they've signed up to come and just, I'm going to the beach today or whatever their reason was. That's fine. But in this world, when you've got to like tell us because of capacity, you're making a promise to come, and then you break the promise. It's like, I really personally, I don't care. It was that morning wanting us to be together and worship and it to be full and feel good, and I was kind of like, it doesn't feel good to me. But that's my own insecurity. It has nothing to do with that. It has me wanting it to be awesome. You know, 100 people in here, singing, which we can't do any of. It's another one of those things. Like, I would love to have this thing lined with chairs of people and singing full on because Will's amazing and it would be great. And apparently you play too. That would be awesome. You know what I mean? But we can't do that. And I just kind of go, it's so hard. You know, and this is one of the reasons I want to talk about broken promises, right? Is because they do that. They either, my theory is when you have them or you have a hope that this is going to happen or a person has made you a promise that you trust, you get energy from that. You have hope from that. And when somebody breaks a promise, it has the opposite effect. Like you were talking about, really it's promising not to hurt somebody again is the promises we make. And that creates safety. And if they fail again, then that creates unsafety. And that takes energy away. It takes security away. It takes hope away, you know? And so promises have incredible power in our life to move us forward. And how we respond to them, and then when they're broken, what it does inside of us is huge. In fact, one of the things you'll find is, and you probably know this from experience, even if you can't call together exact examples of promise, is that in our experience, people, gig friends who didn't bring their crew, like people are fallible, they're not perfect, right? But when God makes a promise in Scripture, He has always and always does keep it. That's the really interesting thing. And so if promises or faithfulness to a promise gives us hope, then that basically means that the promises of God in Scripture are designed to give us that hope. Because we know He's going to keep them. Now, some of us may go, yeah, but He promised me I could be in the NFL and play wide receiver, and that didn't happen. You know, that's not really what I'm talking about, you know. When He says, I will do this, He does it. And our case study for this is this guy in the Bible named Abraham. You may be somewhat familiar with this story. I was telling Will, I just called you Will. I was telling Parker before this, Abraham takes up like 10 some odd chapters of Genesis. So we're not going to read 10 some odd chapters of Genesis. That would not be good. All right, turn your Bible and let's read for half an hour.
Do you promise that?
I do promise. We are.
Don't disappoint.
And you can trust that I will not read 10 chapters. We are going to read highlights. I mean, this is going to be like an ESPN Sports Center version of Abraham's story. I captured a couple of verses from several of the chapters. Because you may or may not be familiar with the story. If you're watching or sitting here, you may be going, okay, I kind of know Abraham's story. But he's a guy that God promised on several occasions that he would have multiple descendants. Like, we'll get to that in a minute, but like children numbering the stars. Right? And as he goes through his story, you'll see it's like, sometimes we probably do this with God's promises too. Like, okay, you promised that. When's that supposed to happen? You know what I mean? And so his experience can kind of be like our experience. So this first part of the story is Genesis 12. And it's just the first 4 verses. I'll read those for you. Now the Lord said to Abram, because this is before his name changed, that's a whole other conversation. Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country, your kindred, your father's house, to the land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the ones who curse you I will curse. And in you all of the families of the earth shall be blessed. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Okay, so most of us are like, if we're 23 going, okay, God's promised I'll do this with ministry. He gets his first promise at 75. So Abram's doing this whole thing, he's 75, and then God goes, okay, you're 75, you're established. Now pick up everything you got and go wherever I'll tell you to go, and I'm not telling you where to go yet. I'm not close to 75 yet, so if he did that for me in 30 some odd years, it'd be interesting. Put that in your perspective, like, I'm this far from 75, and that's when he gets this initial. By the way, if you were promised to have descendants like the stars at 75, what would your response be? Right? So what is it about, I read just the last verse where Abram kind of responded to what his promise was. Maybe I don't know if you caught that or not. But what was Abram's reaction, first of all? And then what's your thoughts about the way he responded? Did you catch that in the passage? Because it kind of just comes in at the very end there. I'll read it, part of it again so you catch it. So listen this time for Abram's response to God's promise. Verse 3, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. By the way, those first 4 verses, it's a pretty killer promise, right? I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. He's like, you're going to be certified blue check, buddy. I mean, he's like, you're going to be famous. To which Abram goes, sweet. But then he says, I will make you, and the whole world will be blessed because of you. So Abram went as the Lord told him. That's what it says in verse 4. Anything stand out about that?
His faith that it would happen, and it did take forever. So I'm sure it's for him, and he was probably thinking, I'm too old to have children at 75, you know.
Right. I'm going to be a great nation. And it's not here where I am. That's interesting.
But it just had to take such a tremendous amount of faith to follow it.
There was no deliberation.
No, right?
Yeah.
There's not 4 more verses where Abram like thought about it and put out a fleece, another passage altogether. Like there's no, it's just like, so he went.
Very opposite of Moses, who argued back.
Correct. Moses is like, but I stutter, but not me, I'm not good at that.
Abram just went.
Just went. Isn't that crazy? Like there's the Bible, it's one of those places in the scriptures where it's like the Bible is so like understated. God says, I'm going to bless you like crazy, make your name great, just pick up everything you've got and go wherever I lead you to go. And Abram's like, okay. Like, if God spoke to you this afternoon and said, this is what I want you to do, Elizabeth, you'd be like, all right. I mean, it's so...
I mean, if God comes out of the
If
sky and
I were
talks
to
to me.
say, all right, I think I would actually, like, I love what you were saying about faith. I think I would probably be like, all right, no way. Like, I'll, you know, like, no way you're going to do all this. Like, I'll go, but...
Yeah, so maybe he doesn't even the writer didn't even clarify what
Like,
his
did he
real
go
reaction.
in faith, or
Yeah,
did he go
did he
in
go?
obligation, or did he go in,
That's
like...
pretty vague, God. Okay, we'll just pick up everything and go. You know, if God goes, all right, just get on 20, you know, just get on Highway 55 and go, and I'll tell you when to stop, you know, I'll be like, that'll be interesting. You know, but all right, let's roll. How much food do I need? How much money do I need? You know, the planner people be like, I need a schedule. And Abram's like, okay, at least as far as we know from the writer. Mm-hmm. But there is a faith element in it, or at least an implicit, well, God's going to, we can't wait to see what he's going to do because something's going on there. Mm-hmm. But it's just like one thing that he's like, all right, I'm going to be a great nation. What do I got to do? It's interesting. Because when we look at Scripture and we get promises from God, and he says, trust me and I'll make your path straight and all that, we kind of have the same reaction. Like, okay, we'll see how that goes. You know? Or we just go, or sometimes we're Moses and we're like, but you know, I'm not real good at that. Please don't call on me to pray in public. You know, like, that's not my thing. Share the gospel. I don't know how. What are they going to say? Will they accept me? You want me to go to a mission field where? Like, times that people have called us to stuff. You want me to move from Florida back to Mississippi? No, I'm just kidding. Like, all these things where it's like, okay, God, or it's, sure, let's do it. Like, what is our response to a promise from God? Because he does, yeah, I think you were trying to say this, but if God goes, this is what I want you to do, you know, I might be like, okay, because it's so clear, right? Oh, God told me to do this, I'm doing it. But he is that clear in some cases, and we still kind of go, did it really say I'm supposed to do that? I'm supposed to tithe what? You know, like, what is it that it's going to take some trust just to get up and go? That's kind of interesting.
And so often we hear it, and for the first week, we're like, yeah, that's what I heard God say to me. That's what we need to do. And then week 2 comes around, and you're like, did he really say it? Is that really what he meant? And I have that experience just from past times of being on fire for the first week, 2, 3 weeks, month, and then it kind of fizzes out, and that's that.
As soon as it gets hard, we kind of go, was that really what we were supposed to be doing? Mm-hmm. I think this is really funny. And one of the reasons I'm in ministry, part of my call, is because it's always new. Mm-hmm. It's one of the things I love about being in full-time ministry is no day is really the same. There's a different person that needs help. There's a different conversation. There's a different ministry plan. You put this ministry plan aside, you go. I like the constant deal. I like the change. I get into a rhythm when I have to do something every time, every week. I go, you know, it's like, oh, I got to put attendance in again. You know, whatever it is that's mundane, it's like, no, I need the constant, off the seat of the pants Bible study or something. This is Genesis 15. We're going to pick Abram's story up a little bit later. Second time that God literally looks at Abram and says, here's my promise to you. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue to be childless, and the heir of my house is Eleazar of Damascus. And Abram said, you have given me no offspring, and so a slave born in my house is going to be my heir. But the word of the Lord came to him, this man shall not be your heir, no one but your very own issue shall be your heir. He brought him outside and said, look toward heaven and count the stars, if you are able to count them. Then he said to him, so shall your descendants be. And he believed the Lord, and the Lord reconciled it to him as righteousness. All right, so this is part 2 of the promise. Some time has passed, right? And Abram's like, I was 75 when this started. Some time has passed, some challenges have come up. I still don't have any kids. And so he responds to God's promise a little differently this time, right? How does he respond this time?
He questions him.
Yeah, he's starting to go, okay, you said lots of kids. I was 75.
Well, I think God says, have faith. I promised you this, and I think it's human nature. We want it now, and we don't want to wait, and so that's kind of what I get from it. It's like, hey, I've been waiting, and nothing's happened, and promise me this, so.
I'm sure he's starting to worry. I mean, that anxiety is just taking over his faith,
What else do I have to do, God? You said you'd give me descendants. To quote my cousin Vinny, my biological clock is ticking like this. You know what I mean? Like, he's just absurd 90s movie reference. Is it 90s? I hope it's 90s. Anyway,
You're showing your age.
I know. Half the audience watching us is like, my cousin Vinny? Netflix, it is worth it. Yeah, he goes, okay, you promised. Time's gone by. It says after these things happen, some challenges happen. He has to go rescue Lot. Like, Abram, who's farmer and wealthy, becomes military commander to rescue his nephew. You know what I mean? Like, there's stuff going on. He's like, what else do I have to do to prove that I'm faithful? Remember, the first promise is like, okay, I'll go. And so now he's looking at God going, but you promised. When's this going to happen? And God takes him outside and says, look at the stars. If you could count them, that's how many descendants you'll have. And so God doubles down on the same promise as before, even though Abram's kind of going, but I don't see it happening. Now, what about you? Has God ever put a promise in front of you and you went, I don't see it happening? We were just joking about that a minute ago. And you kind of go, yeah, I'm skeptical, but this is more, why aren't you? It's not just skepticism in his own ability to carry it out in us. It's more like, why haven't you yet? Kind of what you're talking about, like timing and patience.
Yeah.
God, you said you would do this. I don't see it. You might experience that.
I guess some back in high school, part of my story involves restarting my high school's Fellowship of Christian Athletes. It was me and another guy named Matthew for a while, and that's when I first heard the call to ministry, was in this time, and it was still another school year before anything happened. And we were talking before at dinner about growing, and it's not just these moments that happen when you grow a lot, it's the time before too. So there was some questioning of, I heard very clearly, I think, my junior year, that this is going to happen, this is what you want me to do. I am now a senior. I am leaving high school as fast as I possibly can. And this hasn't happened yet. And then I started to doubt, did I really hear it? Or did I just hear what I wanted to hear out of something?
I'm glad you bring that up. A lot of times when I'm trying to listen to God, I always have this question in the back of my head. Is this my ego that wants this, or God telling me what I want? Which voice is that really? Is that my drive, or is that God's desire? That's always the question. You're supposed to have, Abram here, not me, millions of kids, right? Abram's going, I'm 85, 90 now. How am I going to have millions of kids? Is it me wanting millions of kids and being great, or is God really going to give me millions of kids?
And I love that he took them, I would guess, in the desert is where he was. So there was probably clear night sky in the desert. Those are more stars than we can imagine.
No electricity, no lights to drown it out.
No light pollution, no
That's right.
any pollution. Like the stars. And he says, like, if you can count them. I bet you couldn't. If you tried really, really hard, you couldn't.
Can't even keep track. Did I count that one yet? Yeah. And so you've got this really interesting about Abram's journey is he goes from, okay, to, why haven't you done this yet? You know? And his experience is our experience. That's what I'm trying to drive out. Like, we talk about the power of promises in our life. When God makes us what we think is a clear promise, we're like, okay, I'll do it. And then later we're like, this hasn't happened yet. When my call to ministry was like that, I'm supposed to be a pastor. I know it. I can feel it. So you go to seminary, and you graduate seminary, and different system, couldn't find a job as a pastor for a year. I'm like, okay, I give up. I'm going to go do what I used to do before. And 7 years of doing that later, I'm still not a pastor. And there was just something like, why did you call me to seminary? Like, what? When's that going to happen? And then, boom, I'm in Mississippi as a pastor. But the timing was never what I had in mind. And the place and the way was never what I had in mind. And makes you question, like, sometimes I think we think God has failed in the promise, but he just hasn't got around to fulfilling it yet. And we tend to turn our back on it going, he ain't going to do it. And that's exactly when he kind of does it. Maybe in a way we didn't think of. All right, let's pick Abram back up. This is chapter 16. See, I didn't read the whole chapter, so I have kept my promise so far. All right, verses 1 through 4. Now, yeah, that's right. Sarah, Abram's wife, bore him no children. She had an Egyptian slave girl whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, you see, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go in with my slave girl, that it may be that I shall obtain a child by her. Abram listened to the voice of his wife. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, so we've got to be clocking 95 by now, 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her slave girl, and gave her to Abram as a wife also. His slave girl gave her to her husband as a wife. He went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked at contempt on her mistress. So, Abram, what's he do with the promise in this situation? How is he responding to God not following through? It's a little different now. What's he do?
Well, if you're not going to make anything happen, I will.
Bingo. Yep. He takes his own initiative. Okay, I'm clocking 95. Yeah. I don't have dozens, even one kid yet, let alone millions. So he must want me to do something about it. That sound familiar to anybody? Yeah? Experience where you're like, God hadn't answered it, so I'm going to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I was sitting here thinking earlier, like, story of my life, I don't listen enough. You know what I mean? So right. I feel like how I mentioned earlier about making promises, like I'm making more promises to God than I'm listening probably to God telling me, this
is what I'm going to do, God bless it.
Yeah, like I don't know that I'm, I think I'm more, I think you're absolutely right. So I was thinking that earlier. And I mean, totally, I'm somebody who likes to take control of things, letting go, letting God is hard, and particularly if you're waiting for a while and you think your time is almost up, it's kind of like, and then I can trick myself into, God just wants me to take this under control.
Yeah, he said do it.
You know what I mean? Like I can kind of trick
Yeah.
myself into that, but yeah.
Yeah, we're at 2 decades for Abram since the promise was made here, somewhere in that range. And no kid, let alone millions. So he goes, man, I'm just going to try to have one through my slave girl. Which is weird for us, but not so weird back then. But he tries to make it happen. And by the way, do y'all know the fallout from this little passage that I just read? Do you know who the son that's born to Abram is? It's Ishmael, right? So Ishmael is the father of the Arab Islamic nation. So the Middle Eastern conflict goes back to Genesis 16, Ishmael and Isaac, who hadn't appeared on the scene yet. Abraham's descendants at war over the promised land promised to Abram. So why am I bringing that up? Well, Abram takes God's promise in his own hands and creates that situation. Whoops. You know what I mean? If he waits for God to do what he was going to do, which comes not but 5 years later, another 5 years later, by the way, do we have the situation we have in the Middle East? Isn't that interesting? Like, in other words, when he doesn't wait for God, he creates a big mess, is what I'm getting at. Right? And so when we talk about our own impatience, and look, God, I'm doing, a lot of times what we do is like, here's my plan, I'm going to do it, bless it, versus what do you want me to do? And I know that will be blessed because you asked me to do it. And of course, discerning the two is a challenge, right? I mean, it's like, is it me or is it him? You know, imagine Abram thinking this through. Well, I hadn't had any kids through Sarah, so he must be some other way God intends this to happen. I'm going to take some initiative and make this happen. Look, she had a kid. See, I fixed it. He didn't fix it. You know, he didn't solve it. And so through this story, as we're talking through Abram with this promise that's been made at least 20 years earlier at this point, how would you like to wait for God's promise for 20 years? Right?
When you start at 75.
When you start at 75, yeah, exactly. Exactly. And first he's faithful, then he's a little questioning and skeptical, and now he's taking it into his own hands. And so as God seems to fail him, his response tends to change, but we've all done all of these responses. That's kind of what we're getting at here, right? So the promise makes us want to go and leap. God's with me, he's promised me this, I'm going to do it. The hope drives us. And when the promise is not fulfilled, we start to negotiate or complain or try to fix it ourselves. So the lack of promise or broken promise already has made him go from faithful to complaining to rebellion, essentially. Or at least getting outside of his will to try to accomplish it.
We all have to have hope.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the light at the end of the tunnel is hope. It may take us a while to get there, but, you know, eventually.
Well, that's what I think the power of the promise is. The promise actually builds hope into our heart. That's what I was saying earlier, right? If I know, my example earlier, if we could just sing in church on Sunday, I'd be a happy camper, right? We were talking about this earlier this week. The first Sunday that we're allowed to sing again, I'm probably not preaching that Sunday. That's going to be like a 45-minute to an hour longer worship service. Like, go, Will, I'm just going to sit back over here because we haven't sung in so long. There's a part of me that's like excited about that whenever it might happen, February of 21. Who knows? You know, like, I mean, it's somewhere, hopefully not 20 years from now, you know, to follow the promise story we're talking about. But like, there's going to be a day when we can sing, I hope. And notice how I said that, I hope, right? It makes me keep doing what we're doing in the meantime because I'm looking at someday. I can say we will be able to do that, so we have to keep moving until then. And so it does, it fills us that way. All right, so we're going to wrap through the rest of Abraham and Isaac's story. I'm not even sure if I guess I'll read 21, part of 21 too. Actually, I don't need to do that. In 21, Isaac is born when Abram is 100. Remember, the promise started at 75. The scripture in Genesis 21 says that when Abram was 100, Isaac is born to Sarah. 25 years after the promise, God keeps the promise to Abram. One kid. Remember, the descendants are supposed to be like the stars. I will make, and by the way, he says, you know, after he fails and goes off and does this with Hagar and has Ishmael, in chapter 17, he makes the promise again and doubles down and says, I will make great nations of you. So even after Abram fails and kind of does his own thing and takes it into his own hands and takes things off the rails a little bit, God comes back in 17 and goes, I'm still going to do this. I'm still going to keep the promise. Just wait. Well, he didn't say just wait. I said just wait. But he's going to keep his promise. 5 years later, he has Isaac. And Isaac is the father of the Jewish nation. We were talking about the Islamic nation earlier. Isaac's the father of the Jews. And so the stars in the sky and numbering like that, true. Promise kept from 1. So he starts at 75, he hits 100, he has 1 kid. And just like God promised, he forms this nation. Now, part of the promise, if you remember reading this, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. And then he says, the whole world will be blessed through you. Any idea what he's talking about?
Jesus.
The Sunday school answer is always right. Jesus. You know what I mean by the Sunday school answer, right?
Yeah.
Any question you get asked in Sunday school, say Jesus, you'll be right 9 times out of 10. Or probably 10 out of 10. Just think about it. You know, what's the purpose of the Bible? Jesus. You know, like any question you come up with in Sunday school, you know what I mean? Jesus, that's the right answer, correct. Who's going to tell you you're wrong when you say his name, right? Jesus, no, that's wrong. What? You know. Sunday school answer is right. When God says, I'm going to make you a great nation, yeah, your name is going to be great. We're still talking about him, so his name's pretty great. You know, you're going to have descendants like the stars, the entire Jewish nation, right? Promise kept, promise kept. Then he says, I will bless the whole world through your descendants. The answer to that question is?
Jesus.
Jesus, right? Jesus blesses the whole world. How? He redeems it. I mean, that is the gospel. Sunday school answer again, right? Jesus died for you, you know. So because of this, in other words, we're in Genesis, guys. We're in 12, we're in 15, we're in 17. I could pull Genesis 3, 14, and 15, where he says, the serpent's descendants will be crushed, and her descendants will crush your head. You'll strike his heel. In Genesis 3, God has already figured out, he's already making a promise to restore everything. And we're in 12 and 15 and 17, and God's going, I got this. I'm going to restore everything through your descendants. Abram didn't know who Jesus was going to be or how this was going to play out. But he's already got this promise in his head. This is how this is going to play. And we're in the first book. This was not like, oh, I hope that my people will follow me one day. And, you know, he already had a plan. And Abram's like, cool, I'll go. Wait a minute. No, when's this going to happen? It's not going to happen. I'm going to do something about it. Like, Abram's going through this whole process, and yet God still kept his promise to Abram. And eventually changes it to Abraham when he says, this is it. You're the father of the nations. Father Abraham and many sons. That one.
I think
Sunday
part of
school.
the problem too
Sunday
is
school, huh?
it's God's time, not our time. You know, and that's, I think sometimes that's hard to get in your head. I want it to happen now, but it's always his time and it's always the right time, but it's still hard, you know.
Now, there's one more chapter that I won't read, but you probably know the story. Abraham has had Isaac after 25 years. And there's a famous story about Abraham and Isaac where God says to Abraham again, pack him up, take him up the hill, and sacrifice him to me. If you've waited 25 years for God to fulfill a promise, and then God says, yeah, that promise I kept, now we're going to do something with that. What would your response be?
And for it to be his first son.
Huh?
And for it to be his son.
Yeah. Like,
It would definitely be straight to rebellion. It wouldn't,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd be like, are you kidding me? Right? Yeah. You want me to do what? Charlie, I want you to be a pastor. 10 years later, it happens. Now I want you to quit. You know, I mean, that's a totally different level of stakes here. But in my own experience, that's the equivalent. It'd be like, your heart has been set on this for so long, now I don't want you to do that anymore. Hey, at 75, you're going to have all these kids. 25 years later, you get the first one. Now I want you to execute him. Your only son. Gee, that sounds familiar.
Be like major confusion.
Yeah.
I totally agree with rebellion.
Yeah.
But there'd also just be major confusion. Just like, what's the point?
What
Like,
is
what
going
was
on here? Right? What are you doing? We got here, and now you're going to take it away? And if he's making that assumption going up there, and by the way, I didn't read the whole story, but what's Abram's response when God says do it? Do you remember?
I mean, he eventually goes up there.
Eventually. He's pretty much automatic again, just like with the journey.
Started gathering sticks for the fire,
Yeah.
for the altar.
He said, we're going to go up on the hill and worship. And they start putting the stuff together, and yeah, and Isaac carries the wood, I think, that he's going to sacrifice him on. By the way, if you don't see the parallels between that and Jesus, you're not reading the Bible. Carries wood on his back, only son, going to be sacrificed. Yeah. I mean, whole other small group we could do one day, but definitely that's intentional too. So he goes, here's the promise is fulfilled, now I'm going to take it away. And Abram's response is, let's go. And when Isaac asks him, going up the hill, what are we going to sacrifice? Do you remember Abram's answer to that one? It's pretty interesting. Don't remember? His answer to Isaac is, God will provide. So when he's talking about, this is a guy who's waited 25 years for the fulfillment of a promise. The promise is finally fulfilled. So he's got a record with God now that God doesn't work on my timing. He continues to accept me even when I complain and rebel. He doubles down on the promise even when I take things into my own hands. And now he's kept the promise. If he's promised me a great nation, and now he's saying do this, he's trusting God's still going to keep the promise somehow. That's why he's able to do something that sounds to us like, are you kidding me? Because from his perspective, God kept that promise. He'll keep it somehow. Let's go. And so he looks at Isaac and says, God will provide. I mean, that's a nice vague answer to the person you're about to go, sacrifice. God's already provided the solution. I just don't want to tell you you're it. Can you imagine what's going through Abraham's mind? I'm going to sacrifice my only son. Sounds like John 3:16, right? I'm going to sacrifice my only son for what? But he looks at Isaac and says, God will provide. And the rest of that story is when they get up there and when God stops his hand, there's a ram in the bush to be sacrificed. So God did do exactly what Abram said. He provided. My hunch is Abram even assumed if I kill Isaac, he's going to bring him back from the dead. Or he's going to give me another son. He's going to keep his promise. Maybe not through Isaac. I'm going to have a kid at 105. We don't know what he was thinking. But we know he was trusting in the track record of a God who always keeps his promises. Even if it's not when we think or on our terms or even despite our own behavior. So that's playing out in this whole 10-chapter scenario where Abram's like, okay, So let me ask you this. First of all, what are some takeaways from all that? I kind of just gave you some. But what are some takeaways from this long, epic, soon to be fulfilled but not so soon promise? What does that say for you about God and promises and how it shapes your own life? Let me ask it that way.
I guess that sometimes the hardest thing to do is to wait.
Okay.
And, we have so many hard experiences, with other people who are fallible that, don't fulfill their promises. So we kind of take for granted how powerful God's promises are. And we take for granted that we can trust them fully to a point where we can wait for them,
I think the spiritual discipline is figuring out how to wait.
Yeah.
Because if we really think about it, we can trust. I mean, Abraham, when he gets to the point he's about to sacrifice Isaac, at some point, somewhere in there, he's trusting him anyway, even though it sounds. And for us, it's like, God, this promise sounds out there, but you don't fail, so okay. Which reaction of these reactions is most common for you? I'll go, but I don't see how you're going to do this. I'm going to do it myself. I completely trust his promise, and I'll just wait. What's been mostly your experience?
Most of my experience is I'm going to do it myself. That's kind of, something that challenges me that I have to work on. But most of my experience is kind of, this isn't getting done the way I wanted to get done, so I'm going to get in there and fix it.
I'm going to come up with my own plan.
I'm going to come up with my own plan, yeah.
You have to be patient. And sometimes I think your answer might not be what you were looking for, and sometimes I think we need to look a little harder and be grateful for what we do have, and instead of, well, you didn't fulfill this full promise, maybe it's not time,
And I like what Matthew was saying, humans are, they're going to make mistakes and they're going to break promises. But sometimes I can take that experience and humanize God. You know what I mean? And when really what I need to do is be like, no, these are two totally different entities.
Yeah.
I can't use my experience of distrust or broken promises with a human and apply that to the promises
transfer
of
it.
God.
We assume that if people fail us, God will fail us too.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we do that. One of the things that I've heard before is your relationship with your parents will heavily influence or color the way you see your relationship with God. So if you've got strict, overpowering, gonna crush you if you mess up parents, you assume God will too. And if you've got parents who fail you and people who around you have broken promises, you assume God will too. That our own experience in relationship colors the way we view our relationship with God. You're absolutely right. We talked about this when we were talking about being together as a body of Christ. We express our relationship with God through each other, right? And so when somebody comes in contact with me who's not a Christian, the way I treat them shows them who God is. So if I'm not faithful and I'm not trustworthy and I'm mean and nasty, I am showing them that perception of God. No accountability in that statement at all. Right? So they're experiencing Jesus. And so if they've had a bad experience in church or a bad experience with Jesus, then when they encounter a Christian who has a genuine, authentic relationship with God, who treats them the way Christ would treat them, they re-experience God.
Spiritual formation is not for us.
Right. Yeah. We're having side conversation here. There's a I don't know if I'll get the definition right, but I'll draw in what you're saying. Spiritual formation is for the sake of others. We talked for the last few weeks about spiritual disciplines and things that we're supposed to be practicing to shape our relationship with God. We don't study the Bible, and it ties beautifully into this story actually. We don't study the Bible for our own head knowledge or to make ourselves, quote unquote, better Christians. We don't serve in mission so that we can feel good about how spiritual we are. We don't go to church so we can worship and feel uplifted. We do all those things that shape who we are so that we can bless others. The original promise to Abraham is, I will bless you and make your name great, and all of the world will be blessed through you. I'm going to bless you a ton so that you can bless others a ton. He made Abraham who he was so that the world will be blessed through him. So we don't practice spiritual discipline for our own benefit. We practice it for the sake of other people. So the way we experience God and the way we lean into his promises shows the world that God can be trusted too. I like that. Because a lot of times we think, somebody's capable of giving lots of money because they have huge income. Doctor over here that didn't become a doctor. If you're a doctor and you've got that capability of giving, God's blessed you with that mind to accomplish that goal of being a doctor and the financial paycheck that goes with it so that you can be a blessing to others. And that's not just financial, because doctors literally bless others in what they do, right? He's given them the intelligence gifts and the financial gifts to be a blessing for other people, not so they can just pile it up for themselves. And they can pile it for themselves so that they can then distribute it. And he's made the same promise to Abraham. It's like, dude, I'm going to fulfill this promise, but my promise is it's not even for Abraham. Do you get that? Your name, great. You're going to have a bazillion descendants. It's not even for Abraham. It's for the rest of the world. Sunday school answer again. So that Jesus would come and fulfill the promise of Genesis 3 that said the woman's descendants would crush a serpent. So from 3 to 12 to 15 to 17 to 22, we're not even out of Genesis yet, and God is still keeping his promise. And what that does is when we really let that sink into our soul, then we know intuitively that God can be trusted, even though it sounds crazy to our ears, or even sounds counter what the world tells you is important. You're supposed to give your money away. You're supposed to give your time away. You're supposed to give back what you've been blessed with. You're supposed to do what? Sounds absurd. But that's because that stuff was not for us. It was for everybody else. And so promises, coming back to the final piece of this, right? The promises God makes to us is not really for us. His promises can be trusted. And because his promises can be trusted, we can live. I was saying earlier, I wish I had solid ground to run on. I do. It's the promises of God. Circumstances might change. COVID restrictions might change. None of that changes the mission he's given us, is that we be blessed so that we can bless other people. Let me pray for you. God, this is a hard lesson to hear because your promises don't come in our time or on our agenda or in the way that we want. But they come and they're fulfilled. And they're not even necessarily fulfilled for us, but for the world. So help us to lean into your promises like never before, because that is where our hope comes from. In Christ's name, amen.